I got my Edgar Allan Poe hoodie on in preparation for this. I am a huge Mike Flanagan fan. Whenever there's a new release that just has his name attached to it, I'm excited. It's like a holiday for me personally. I'm actually in the middle of rewatching The Haunting of Hill House. I absolutely love that show. And if you haven't watched it yet, you don't know what you're missing out on. Haunting of Hill House, in my opinion, is probably the best modern ghost movie, TV show, miniseries ever. I absolutely love it. It might be my favorite ghost thing ever. In my mind, it's honestly competing with The Shining as my favorite ghost-centric story. But with that being said, I'm always a little bit nervous whenever a new Mike Flanagan project comes out where he's not the sole director. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed The Haunting of Bly Manor. I've heard good things about The Midnight Club, even though I haven't watched it yet. But projects where Mike Flanagan is the sole director are, in my mind, almost all of them S tier. And other projects that he's involved with where he's not the sole director are still good, but not as good in my opinion. So The Fall of the House of Usher just came out today on Netflix, and I just watched a huge chunk of it, and I'm going to review it for you guys here. But before I do that, you should consider subscribing. I talk about TV shows all the time on this page. I also talk about movies. I talk about survival horror video games, and I do trailer reactions. And pretty much everything that I do on this channel, the vast majority of it, leans towards the genre of horror. I am a huge horror fan. And I'm also going to let you know that this review is not going to be a review of the whole series. It's not even going to be a review of the first half of the series. This is going to be more or less a first impressions review. In fact, I'm only going to talk about the first 2 episodes. Because if you're anything like me, you want to know that the first 2 episodes of a show are worth watching. I'm sick and tired of sitting down to watch something being told that it gets good at the end. If you're like me, you want to be hooked from the very, very beginning. You want it to be worth your time, especially a TV show, let alone a movie. But a TV show, a miniseries, a whole season of a show, that's 10 hours of your life. So the first 2 episodes are directed by Mike Flanagan, and his name is attached to the screenplays and the scripts of most of the episodes in this series. The show follows the House of Usher, a family where everyone's last name is Usher, and they more or less run a pharmaceutical empire. And when the show begins, we learn that the main Usher, the main guy, the main head of this corporation, that all of his children have died. And he sits down in a creepy, haunted-looking house talking to a lawyer, explaining all the events that led up to every single one of his children being dead. There's a lot of inner family and inner company politics in this show, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of betrayal. It's a lot like a modern Game of Thrones, and I feel like people say modern Game of Thrones a lot more than they should. It's kind of like how in video games, if a video game is even slightly hard, they say it reminds them of a Souls-like game. But in a lot of ways, this show is like a modern Game of Thrones, the Empire being the company that they run. And the vast majority of the main characters are family members, but there's not a lot of love between any of them. And just like every Mike Flanagan project, every single character in this show is super compelling to me. It's a huge family, a huge cast of characters, and I don't think there's a single weak one, nor is there a single weak performance. He uses a lot of the same cast that he uses in most of his projects, and I'm not complaining about that. They all give phenomenal performances. Mark Hamill is actually in this, which I don't know why. I either didn't know this or I forgot that he was going to be in this, but he's really, really good. Mark Hamill is giving a really good performance in a role unlike anything I've ever seen him do before. And with all these characters, every single one of them feels so human, so real. All their motivations, all their lines of dialogue, everything they do and why they do it, whether or not you agree with it or not, just feels human. And that's one of the best things about Mike Flanagan's writing and Mike Flanagan's direction, is no matter what type of person a character is, he seems to understand just people at their core, who they truly are, how they deal with traumas, how they deal with things they want to accomplish. And again, this is a Mike Flanagan project, so in the middle of all of this is a ghost story. And I will say that the first episode had some really freaky moments, some really memorable visuals, but the second episode barely had anything supernatural and barely had anything paranormal in it. So if you're going into this show expecting it to be as in-your-face sort of ghost story like The Haunting of Hill House, you're not really gonna get that here. And don't get me wrong, Haunting of Hill House was super subtle. It had a lot of ghost moments, it really did, but it was always counterbalanced in the like thought process of, is it really ghosts or is it just them dealing with their trauma? The same thing can kind of be said here for The Fall of House of Usher, but in a different way, and I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but it's very similar, but also very different. But the horror elements are dialed back, especially compared to most Mike Flanagan projects. But don't get me wrong, even though episode 2 was very light on the horror, it was huge in the character moments, and the ending sequence of episode 2 was just brutal, violent, genuinely disturbed me, and was one of probably the creepiest things I've ever seen in a Mike Flanagan project. Now I'm going to talk about the cons of The Fall of House of Usher, and I want to put a giant asterisk next to this, and that is that these are just cons for me personally, and possibly for you if you're like me in your tastes and what you like in the stories that you consume. And there's nothing technically wrong with the narrative that I've seen so far. Like I said, compelling characters, a compelling plot, a lot of likable people, great performances, and great horror elements. But me personally, I'm not a huge fan of shows that center around modern empires, where every character is essentially a shitty person, and you're dealing with drugs, and you're dealing with politics, and you're dealing with huge corporations, and everyone's in a suit and tie, a lot of just, you know, that sort of thing. I'm not personally into that much. And for me personally, it does take me out of the show more than I want to be. Hill House had a setup that I really loved. Bly Manor had a setup that I really loved. Midnight Mass, again, if you haven't watched it, definitely watch Midnight Mass. That has a setup and a base premise and a base plot that I love, which makes the horror elements that much better for me personally. And the character moments, again, that much better for me. But The Fall of House of Usher doesn't really have that. The Fall of the House of Usher's main plot, the main foundation that everything is set upon, just doesn't really interest me. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. If it wasn't for the Mike Flanagan isms that he's so good at coming through full force here, I probably wouldn't have wanted to watch the show past episode 2. But if you are personally a fan of shows where the plots revolve around stuff like that, you're gonna love this because it does it phenomenally. And also, if you're like me and you're just a huge fan of Mike Flanagan, but you're not really a fan of plots like this, I still think that you're gonna really enjoy the show because I am. Anyway, that's my brief and quick thoughts on the first 2 episodes of The Fall of the House of Usher. Have you watched it yet? Let me know in the comments. Are you enjoying it past episode 2? And let me know if you enjoyed this video, because depending on how well this video performs, depending on how many people ask for it in the comments, I definitely wouldn't mind making a follow-up to this video talking about the whole season. But once again, consider subscribing if you liked this video, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.